Namaste. In today's class, we will have a look at population viability analysis, or an analysis of the viability of a population. Now, population, as we have seen before, is a collection of individuals of the same species that are residing in the same area, that are interbreeding amongst each other, and that are separated from any other such similar group of species. So, let us begin with population viability. So, when we say population viability, what do we mean? Population viability is the ability of a population to persist or to avoid extinction. Now, what we are asking here is that suppose you have say around 10 tigers in say Panna Tiger Reserve. So, if you have these 10 tigers, will these 10 tigers be able to persist for a long period of time? Will they be able to avoid extinction, or will they go extinct in a short while? So, population viability analysis is an analysis of the viability of the population. So, an analysis of whether or not this population will be able to persist or not. Now, why do we need to perform such an analysis? So, we have seen before that populations can become extinct because there are two factors operating at all times that could lead to their extinction. These are deterministic factors and stochastic factors. Deterministic factors that act at large population sizes, and stochastic factors that are chance factors acting at smaller population sizes. Now, to recap, we have these three deterministic factors: birth rate, death rate, and the population structure. So, if your death rate is greater than birth rate, then the population might become extinct, or if the population is comprising only of very old individuals, then also it may be moving towards an extinction. Whereas, in the case of stochastic factors or chance factors, we saw that we have demographic stochasticity factors, including the occurrence of probability events such as reproduction, litter size, sex determination, and death. So, this means that probably that even if you have a very small death rate, you could have a situation in which all the adults died off in certain time period, or probably all the breeding individuals had a very small litter size, or probably all the offsprings that were born happened to be males. So, these are stochastic factors that would be working when the population sizes are smaller, otherwise they would get averaged out, and so we would not be able to see this stochasticity. The second are environmental variations and fluctuations. So, things such as temperatures or say droughts. The third is catastrophes such as forest fires and diseases. Then genetic processes including loss of heterogeneity and inbreeding depression, that could also be acting at very small population sizes because all the individuals are now genetically related to each other. Or we could have some deterministic processes such as density dependent mortality on exceeding the carrying capacity of the habitat. So, if you have a habitat in which we have a very small carrying capacity, so carrying capacity will tell us the number of individuals that this habitat would be able to sustain. So, for instance, if you have a tiger reserve and this tiger reserve is all full of say trees and only full of say wetlands, but it does not have any grasses. So, there would be a very less number of herbivores that this tiger reserve would be able to sustain, and a less number of herbivores would mean a less prey population, which would also tell us that this tiger reserve would be able to sustain a very less number of tigers. On the other hand, if we tried to increase the carrying capacity of the habitat, probably by say cutting off a few trees and converting some areas into grasslands, maybe also by draining off some amount of the wetlands and converting those also into grasslands. So, in those cases the carrying capacity of the habitat would increase, so it would be able to sustain more number of herbivores and also more number of carnivores such as the tigers. And the last is migration amongst populations. So, if there is a very small population and there are a few individuals that migrate out, then whatever remains might not be able to sustain the population in its own place. Another definition of population viability analysis is that it is a process by which the extinction probability of a certain species of or population is assessed by integrating data on the life history, demography, genetics of the species with information on the variability of environment, diseases, stochasticity, etc., by utilizing mathematical models and computer simulations in order to predict whether the population will remain viable or go extinct in a decided time frame under various management options. Essentially what this is trying to say is that we know what is the demography of the population, how many males and females are there, what is their age classification. We also know the life history of the population, that is how long does an individual survive, at what age do the individuals become reproductive, what is their litter size. We also know the genetics of this species, what is the level of homozygosity or heterozygosity that is present in that species. We can also make some guess about the variability in the environment by looking at past data. So, for instance, if we say that every third year we get a drought, so we can make use of this information. We can also look at the diseases that are prevalent there and how frequent do we get an outbreak of diseases. We can look at some other stochasticities, and when we have all these information, we can put these information into a mathematical model or a computer simulation. So, when all of these data are being fed into a computer simulation, then we can use this simulation to predict whether this population will remain viable or go extinct in a decided time frame. So, essentially we could say that we are looking at population viability for say the next 100 years or say for the next 1000 years, and with all these initial conditions, will our population able to survive or not under various management options. So, various management options could include harvest of some individuals or say supplementation of some individuals. Harvest means that we are culling off some individuals and then removing them from the population, so that our population does not go very close to the carrying capacity. Supplementation is a process in which we are bringing in individuals from some other area into our population, so as to bring about a genetic rescue or to increase the population size. So, given all of these conditions, we can use a mathematical model or a computer simulation to predict what is going to happen, and this prediction will be very important for our management interventions. A third definition says that population viability analysis may be defined as any methodology that is used to determine a minimum viable population or the size at which the population has a 99% probability of persistence for 1000 years. Now, in this case we are turning our earlier definition upside down. We are saying that we will not start by saying that we have this much size of the population, but we are going to back calculate that if we have our time frame of 1000 years, if we have our survival probability of 99%, and given all of our other inputs, that is the life history, the stochasticity, the rates at which the environment fluctuates and so on, we will use all of this information to back calculate the minimum viable population that needs to be there in an area. So, essentially we could go with this in both the ways. So, in our previous definition, so in this definition what we could do is that we can start with say 4 individuals, and with 4 individuals for the next 1000 years, what is the extinction probability? If the extinction probability is less than 1% or the survival probability is more than 99%, then we would say that 4 individuals are enough. But then if the probability of survival for the next 1000 years is say 80%, then in place of 4 individuals we will go for 5 individuals, then with 6 individuals and so on, so as to determine the minimum viable population that is needed to get to our decided outputs of 99% probability for 1000 years, and we will look at it in more details when we go into the computer simulation in a short while. Now, population viability analysis also goes by a number of other terms such as extinction risk assessment. So, in this case we are trying to emphasize that we want to know what is the probability of the population getting extinct in a decided time frame. So, it is an extinction risk assessment. It is also a population vulnerability analysis. Why is it a vulnerability analysis? Because we can tinker with our stochasticity variables to see whether our population is more vulnerable to extinction because of poaching, or our population is more vulnerable to extinction because it is reaching the carrying capacity, or say our population is more vulnerable to extinction because of say inbreeding depression. So, we can play with all of our parameters to understand which parameter is making our population most vulnerable to extinction. So, this is also another way in which this analysis can be used. Next is predictive simulation modeling. So, in this case we are doing a simulation and modeling to predict the future of the population. And next is the stochastic population modeling, because we are using stochastic phenomena to model our population to understand how this population will behave in the next few years. And there are three ways of doing population viability analysis. The first one is to use empirical observations. Now, empirical observations means that we are referring to the field observations. So, field observations of the stability and long term fates of a number of populations of various sizes. An example is the study of viability of various population sizes of the bighorn sheep. So, what we are saying here in the case of empirical observations is that we have a number of case studies from the field, and in these case studies we are looking at a number of populations. So, the first population says started with 10 individuals, there was some other population that started with 12 individuals, 14, 16 and so on. Say n is equal to 50, n is equal to 100, n is equal to 500. Now, we have all of these case studies that we have been observing out there in the field. Now, what were the results of these cases? So, in this instance there was a population of 12 individuals that was say residing in one mountain top, and this mountain top population was separated from all of the other populations. So, we started observing these populations and we saw that after say 4 generations this population went into an extinction because of say inbreeding. Then we also looked at some other populations. We looked at a population at 40 sizes. So, we had 40 individuals on top of a mountain, and this population was also separated from all the other surrounding populations, and we let's say this population is able to survive for say 20 generations, and even after 20 generations this population is surviving. And same with the case of the 50 individual population or 500 individual population. So, we would say, and say in the case of 38 individual population, this population survived for say 20 generations, and after that this population became extinct. So, by using all of these empirical observations, we would say that 10, 12, 14, 16, anything up to 38 dies off in 20 generations, but anything that is 40 or more, it survives. So, this survives, this survives, this survives, this survives, and all of these survive. So, in this case we would say that our minimum viable population is 40, because if we have 40 individuals then our population will survive for a very long period, more than 20 generations, or say more than 100 years or more than 1000 years. So, this is one way in which we are just making use of field information or empirical information to understand the viability of different population sizes. So, this is the first approach. The second approach is the development of analytical models of the extinction process that permit calculation of the probability of extinction from measurements of a small number of measurable parameters. So, an example is Goodman's model of the demography of chance extinction. So, what we are doing in this method of population viability analysis is that we are developing an extinction model, an analytical model or a mathematical model of the extinction process. So, we are doing some amounts of computations to develop a model which is a mathematical model, and once you have this model, so this model will be using a number of inputs. So, this is our model, and in this model we are providing a number of inputs. These inputs could be say population size or the stochasticity, or so this stochasticity could include environmental variation or say diseases. Then we could also include things such as the life history of the population, which tells us the age at which individuals become reproductive, the litter size and so on. Or we could also include things such as the amount of inbreeding that is there in the population. So, all of these are different inputs. Now, we put all these inputs in a mathematical model and we understand the population viability for this population size of n for n number of years. or for t number of years, which could be 100 years or 1000 years. So, in this second method we have development of analytical models of the extinction process that permits the calculation of population viability or the extinction possibility. But these days because we have quite a good amount of computing power, this is our third method that we use most often. So, this is utilization of computer simulations and modeling to project the probability distribution of possible fates of a population. An example is the software Vortex. So, what we are doing here is that we are using a computer to do a brute force analysis. So, in this case what we are doing is that suppose we have the probability of drought is say 1 in every 3 years, and the probability of a disease is say 1 in every 5 years. So, what we are doing here is that we are asking our computer to start with a population size say 20 individuals, and then it will go with a number of simulations. So, it will go with a number of simulations. Now, there would be one simulation that would say that in the first year we have a drought and a disease. Then there is another simulation that says that we begin only with a disease. There is a third simulation that says we begin only with a drought. Now, in this simulation a drought and a disease year is followed by only a disease year, or we could have another year with both drought and disease, or we could have a third year that has only a drought, or we can have a fourth year that does not have any of these. So, it is a blank year, and then each of these would then again be forked up. So, once we are using such a method, we have a computer simulation and modeling to project the probability distribution of possible fates. So, probability distribution of possible fates would mean that once we have done all of these simulations, we would say that we have say done 10,000 simulations, and out of these 10,000 simulations we observed that in 300 the population went to an extinction. So, then we would say that the probability of extinction is given by 300 by 10,000 into 100, which is 3%. So, there is a 3% possibility of extinction under these circumstances of every third year being a drought, or probability of disease being 1 in 5. So, here we are doing a probability distribution of the possible fates of a population, and an example is a software Vortex that we will look into in a short while. But before we do that, what does this model require? So, population viability analysis through this method has two defining prerequisite characteristics. One is an explicit model of the extinction process. So, basically earlier when we saw that we used a mathematical model or an analytical model, such an explicit model of extinction process is also required for the computer simulation to begin with, and also it requires a quantification of the threats to extinction. That is, we require a quantification of all of these probabilities. So, the probability of drought, probability of a disease, or say probability of a flood, or probability of extremes of temperatures, all of these will also need to be quantified. So, quantified means that we cannot just say that we will have a drought sometime, we will have to put a figure regarding how many years will we get a drought. So, now we will go into a demonstration of the Vortex software. So, let us now have a look at a demonstration of the Vortex software, and here we are using the EDDI software, which is an educational light version of the same software. So, we open our project. Now, we have named this as a project Tiger, and here we are required to give all different sorts of inputs that we just discussed. So, essentially we are putting number of iterations. So, basically how many number of cases do we want to see? Do we want to see 100 cases? Do we want to see 1,000 cases, 10,000 cases, or so on? And then how many years are we do we require the simulation to run? So, do we want to see the extinction probability in the next 100 years, or say the next 1000 years, and so on. In this case we are only dealing with one population, so we are not dealing with any migration, emigration or emigration. Then we could also include things like inbreeding depression and the lethal equivalents, but for simplicity we will ignore this for the time being. Now, in the case of the reproductive system, we are saying that a tiger is a polygynous individual. So, essentially one male tiger can mate with any number of females. Then we are putting in all the life history. So for the females, the age of first offspring is the age of sexual maturity, that is 3 years. For the males, the sexual maturity is 4 years. The maximum lifespan. Now in the zoo conditions, we have seen tigers growing living for as many as 26 years, but in the forest areas, in the natural scenarios, we will put it as 20 years. Now maximum number of broods per year is 1. Maximum number of progeny per brood is how many individuals are born in a litter, let us call it 3. Sex ratio of birth, let us say that 50% of the individuals that are born are males. Maximum age of female reproduction and male reproduction, we keep it at 14. Next we go to the reproductive rates. Now this is asking us percentage of adult females that are breeding. So if we have 10 adult females, do all of them breed at the same time? Now it is observed that in the case of tigers, if there is a female that has given one litter, the cub remains with the mother for around 3 years. So in that case, let us put this as 40%, and then distribution of broods per year. So we will say that 0 broods is 0, 1 brood is 100. So these are things that we can play with. Next we are putting it in the mortality rates. So in the case of females and in the case of males as well. So we are saying that mortality from age 0 to 1 is 50%. So here we are talking about the infant mortality rate. Let us put it at 50%, and then if there is a tigress of age 1, then in the next 1 year there is only 10% mortality, and so on. So we can put all of these figures. Next we are putting in catastrophes, and we are saying here that we are going to have 2 number of catastrophes, 2 types of catastrophes, and then we can also put in their frequencies. The next tab talks about the population size. So let us begin with a population size of 30, and here we are having a female distribution and the male distribution when we are having 30 individuals. So we can either use a stable age distribution in which the software computes it automatically, or we can calculate any of these values by ourselves. So we can say in place of 2 individuals, here we have 3 individuals, and in place of say at age 7 we do not have any individual. So we can play with all these parameters. Next we have the carrying capacity. So this has more to deal with our age, our density dependent mortality. So let us say that the carrying capacity of the environment is 100 individuals. So it can support 100 tigers. Harvest is talking about the number of tigers that are being removed, say by poaching or by culling. So poaching could be say illegal poaching, in which hunters are getting inside and killing tigers for their skin or say for their bones, or we could even go for a culling of tigers. So if there is a huge amount of inbreeding depression, then we could go for a departmental culling. Now departmental culling is not done in India, so we will ignore this. And supplementation is talking about how many individuals you are bringing in from some other population to supplement this population. So we will ignore this for the time being. So let us see that if you have 30 individual population, how does the simulation look like? So let us run the simulation. So what we saw is that up till this 100 years, and we have run 100 number of simulations. Now in these 100 number of simulations, we are seeing that the probability of extinction is 0%, because there was no scenario in which any of these populations came to a decline. But in the case of this particular simulation, we see that the population size decreased from 20 to say close to around 6, but then it was able to recover after this, but then it is also possible that it could have gone down. Next, let us begin with an initial population size of say 4. So we have, or let us take the extreme case, we are starting only with 2 individuals. Now in these 2 individuals, we are having a female of age 5 and we are having a male of age 5. So now let us run the simulation again with only 2 individuals. Now what we are observing here is that there is an 82% probability of extinction, because of all the 100 simulations that we run, 82 were touching this line of 0. So once it has reached to a population size of 0, so the population has become extinct. Let us now increase the population size. So, in place of having 2 individuals, let us begin with 4 individuals. Now, with 4 individuals, now we are automatically saying that we have an individual of age 2 and age 8 both for males and females, but then we can also change this. So, let us say that in place of having age 2 individual, let us have a female of age 4 and a female of age 8. Now, let us run this simulation again. Now, from an 82% probability of extinction, now the probability of extinction has come down to 55%. So, it tells us that only 55 out of these 100 simulations touch 0, rest were able to reach the carrying capacity or somewhere in between. Now, let us increase our population size. Let us begin with 6 individuals. Now, when we begin with 6 individuals, here again we are seeing extinctions. So, now the probability of extinction has come down to 36%. Now, we can just go on playing with these figures. So, let us begin with a population size of 8. Now, more and more populations or more and more simulations are able to avoid extinction. So, from 36% it has come down to 27%. So, what we are trying to do here is that we are trying to understand the minimum viable population size. Here also we are seeing extinction, so we will say that this is also not a viable population, but then the extinction probability is now only 19%. Now, with 12 individuals as our starting, we have an extinction probability of 17%. Let us increase it even further. We have brought it down to 12%. And let us talk about a cutoff. Let us say that if it is less than 5%, then we will say that our population will be say a minimum viable population, because even if we have a very low probability of extinction, even if it is 1%, it is possible that our population may go extinct after some time. So, here we are very close to our cutoff of 5%. So, we are at 6%. Let us put it at 18 individuals. Run it again. Here we have reached 5%. So, in this case, once we have decided on our cutoff, so we said that if our probability of extinction is less than 5%, less than or equal to 5%, then we will say that this will be a minimum viable population. So, by this way we have come to the conclusion that 18 individuals is something that will provide us the minimum viable population. And then we can also include things like harvest. So, in the case of harvest, we can say how many individuals are getting poached out. So, let us say that, let us use our default values and run the simulation again. So, we are harvesting some individuals, but not to a very large extent, and our probability of extinction has gone up, it has gone to 9%. So, we would say that our population has ceased to be a minimum viable population, or let us say that we increase it further 1, and number of females of each age to be harvested, let us say 1 here, and number of males here is, let us say 2. So, now we are intensifying the level of poaching that is there in the population. So, it is still 9%. So, basically we can play with such parameters. And once we go on running these simulations, we will get an idea of how all of these things, whether our poaching or also supplementation, are going to help us or are going to lead this population to extinction. So, this is the demonstration of the Vortex software. Now, apart from just using softwares and simulations for understanding of just the population viability. These days population viability analysis is also being used for other things besides extinction, such as the measure of the health of the population, such as the mean and variance in the population growth, changes in the range, distribution and habitat occupancy, and losses of genetic variability. So when we looked in our simulation, we saw that our last column was the amount of genetic heterozygosity that was present in the population. So things such as these can also be understood by using methods that are very similar to our population viability analysis. Now the utility of such an exercise is that it is an important management tool for conservation, because we can compute a number of parameters and we can answer a number of questions, such as calculation of the probability of persistence of a population under current conditions. So for instance, if you have a tiger reserve and if you want to say that only this small size tiger reserve is not going to be sufficient for the population because the carrying capacity is less. So you can use these simulations to come out with a minimum area that would be required for your tiger reserve. Similarly, calculation of the probability of persistence of a population under altered management intervention conditions. So altered management intervention conditions could include, say, increase of the size of the tiger reserve. So you can also include an increased carrying capacity and then redo the calculation to see if it increases the probability of persistence of the population. Also calculation of the most likely average population conditions, including population size, range of population sizes across years, and of loss of genetic variation. So when we are doing these simulations, we can ask the computer that at every iteration it should give us the population size, the range of population sizes, and also the rate of loss of genetic variation. We can even look at things such as the numbers of males and the number of females that would be there under different conditions. So that, for example, if there is a poaching, and poaching is mostly done for males because they are of a larger size and also because they come out of the reserve area when they are dispersing. So in those situations males are preferentially removed from the system. So we can use such an analysis to ask this question, that how would the sex ratio change with time. Also identification of the most likely risk factors for individual populations. So is it large deaths, large number of fluctuations, inbreeding, or other factors. So essentially we are looking at the vulnerability of the population because of all of these different risk factors. Then sensitivity analysis of the population towards varying estimates of reproductive success, juvenile and adult survival, impacts of natural catastrophes, initial population size, carrying capacity, and dispersal among the populations. So in this case what we are doing is that we are asking that if we give this population more protection so that there is a better juvenile and adult survival rate, how is that going to affect the population? So is protection more important for our population, or say reducing the impacts of natural catastrophes is more important? So if our area is suffering from droughts, do we, and it is also suffering from poaching, do we give more attention to poaching, or do we give more attention to construction of more water holes in this area, are things that could be asked using this same technique. Also effects of removing certain individuals from the population, that is, here we are asking what is the impact of poaching or culling of the population of different ages and different sexes, and estimation of the benefits of population supplementation through translocation or release of captive breeding stocks. So if we are doing any supplementation, so we are bringing in tigers from some other reserve into our reserve, so how is that going to help our reserve is something that we can ask with this simulation. Now others include calculation of the permissible levels of controlled harvest. So this is more useful in the case of African countries that have a legalized hunting. So we can use these sorts of simulations to ask the questions regarding how many individuals can we permit to be hunted every year. So we can calculate that and then use that as a management decision. Also estimation of the impact of poaching on a population, estimation of the utility of corridors for improving the long term viability of the population. Now what we are doing here is that suppose you have a larger sized forest and you have a smaller sized forest. In this smaller sized forest you have a lower carrying capacity. Now because of this lower carrying capacity, suppose this forest can only support say 6 individuals. Now 6 individuals is very less, and so this population will go towards the decline, and in a few generations we would have a situation in which this population becomes extinct. However, nearby we also have a larger forest with a high carrying capacity. So suppose this has a carrying capacity for say 200 individuals. Now if we constructed a corridor between both of these, so we connected both of these forests with a small patch of forest, so in that case these individuals, when they are dispersing out, they could even disperse into this area, and in that case these 6 individuals would have resulted in a decline of this population because of say inbreeding. But because we are having a continuous influx of individuals from the larger forest, this population would be able to survive. So this population would then survive for a very long period. So this is what we are asking here. Estimation of the utility of corridors for improving the long term viability of a population. So in place of going on with more and more supplementation, if we had a corridor, would that help us more than what our other interventions would have helped us. Also, estimation of the impacts of anthropogenic activities on the long term sustenance of populations. Now these anthropogenic activities include not just poaching, but also things like habitat loss and habitat degradation, and also habitat fragmentation. So in all of these situations we are getting to a situation in which the habitat has a reduced carrying capacity. So not only are we removing our individuals from the population, but we are also reducing the carrying capacity of the habitat. So this is what we are asking here, estimation of the impacts of anthropogenic activities on the long term sustenance of populations. Also things such as if we already have a corridor somewhere, and if this corridor is taken off because this land, this small patch has been diverted for agriculture, what would be the impact of that on the population. So things such as these can also be asked in the case of population viability analysis. So in this lecture we had a look at the concept of population viability analysis and how we can use 3 different methods: the empirical method that uses field observation data, the mathematical method, and also the simulation method. And we also worked with our software called Vortex. ADDIE is a lightweight version of Vortex, but then we had a glimpse of how we input all of our different input parameters such as life history and starting population size, number of catastrophes and so on, and how this software runs n number of simulations, say 100 simulations for a time period of say 100 years, to give us an extinction probability for each of these initial conditions. And we can use all of these to estimate not only the minimum population viable population size that should be there, but also the impacts of various interventions to help our management decision making. So that's all for today. Thank you for your attention. Jai Hind.